Welcome to the Busy Mom Show, the show to help mums and their families thrive. I'm your host, Dr. Leonaura Rhodes, and I'm delighted to have on the show today John Page Burton, and John and I are going to be talking in just a moment about wisdom through failure. But first, I just want to tell you a little bit about the show and the concept behind it. So I'm author of a book called Beyond Soccer Moms, Strategies for a Fabulous Balanced Life, which is just about to be released. And Beyond Soccer Mom contains the best strategies that I've learned in over 20 years as a physician, coach, neuroscience expert, and busy and often very stressed mother. And after I finished writing the book, I didn't want to stop helping people there. I wanted to learn more from other experts on things that could help mums and their families thrive. And that's the concept behind the Busy Mom Show. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to John Page Burton. John is an author, inspirational speaker, peak performance strategist, and trainer. And John and I met through some training that we were both doing with Tony Robbins and Chloe Madonna's called Strategic Intervention Training. And so that's how I met John. So welcome, John. And if you could start by just introducing yourself a little bit and tell us about your book, Wisdom Through Failure, that I'm about halfway through reading. It's a great read. Thank you.
Welcome. Well, it's a privilege to be here, and I just appreciate you having me today. And just, like you said, we met through the, Tony and Chloe's program, but it's expanded out, and I'm really looking forward to your work, and I'm watching what you're doing with Beyond Soccer Mom and the Busy Mom Show, and I'm just excited to be able to be a part of this, even though I'm not obviously a busy mom. I can relate to moms, and I certainly can relate to the mompreneurs out there. And I was talking with a client yesterday who's a busy mom, who's the CEO of her own company, who managed to do that with 3 small children. So I get this dynamic, and it's absolutely crazy how effective moms are. I mean, they are CEOs. I read about that in my book, that moms have a lot of the same traits they've already mastered of those of successful CEOs. I mean, you have to have time management skills. You've got to have super strong negotiation skills, things like that. So they're constantly at the bargaining table. They're constantly negotiating. They're constantly, taking their resources, for example. I mean, busy moms are masterful at resource management. I mean, they can turn, 2 slices of bread and a spoonful of peanut butter into a masterpiece because they learn to do that. They also can balance budget. So I always get excited and when I see, mompreneurs, successful moms, because they're out there and they have challenges that we don't have. I get up in the morning, I go to work. That's what I was, raised to do. I'm to be the breadwinner. Yeah. To hear moms that are out there and they want their piece of that as well. They want to experience that as well. And so, in my opinion, moms have such a unique set of challenges, yet they're masterful at the skills that we kind of take for granted. In fact, I think in most cases they're actually much more effective managers than we are, and we being male. So long answer to a short question, but those are my thoughts on that.
Yeah, you're so right. It was interesting when I went back to work after my first son had been born. I was much more efficient. When I was at work, I just worked, and I stopped engaging in all of those kind of unnecessary conversations. And when I sat down to work, I was extremely focused because my time had become so much more precious. And so that's fascinating what you say. Thanks for flattering us all as well.
Very true.
So tell us a little bit more about your book, John.
Well, I think wisdom through failure, as I say in the forward, is kind of, it's an evolution of the last 30 years of my life. I graduated from college in 1984. And like a lot of people, I just began failing my way to success. However, it really wasn't until about 5 years ago that I began realizing that all these, what I consider to be these disappointments, failures, setbacks, were simply lessons that I needed to learn along the journey. And the things that I interpreted as failures were actually necessary. They were necessary pieces for my growth. And I can look back now at 53, look back and over the last, say 30, even 35 years, I can look back and I can see how everything led me to this point today where I have so much more wisdom than I did back then. And some people call it the school of hard knocks, trial and error.
Yeah.
But I really believe that if we didn't have failure, if we didn't have setbacks, number one, it would be an extremely dull world, because most of us need that adrenaline. We need that uncertainty, as Tony talks about a lot. You know, one of the human needs being uncertainty, which is variety. But we need to learn. We need to learn through trial and error. And when we embrace failure, as opposed to, you know, looking at it as a bad thing, it just makes our life a lot easier. I mean, I've had 2 or 3 setbacks this week that I could have gotten really disappointed about. Oh, but I worked so hard and that fell through. And however, I've come to realize that, as I talk about in my book as well, these are just God scheduled opportunities. If I were meant to be there, I would be. Yeah. And so when you start to take it from that type of a perspective, look at it from that perspective rather, I think it makes failure a lot more palatable. And so that was the basis of the book. The basis was to, really highlight wisdom as being a good thing. And I spent considerable amount of time talking with parents now about, easing up a little bit. We live in a society where our children, I've read about suicides where kids, they got a B. And they ended up committing suicide because it wasn't good enough, and they were so shamed that they couldn't take that home, and they committed suicide. When I see something like that, read something like that, it breaks my heart, because there's a failure on the parenting end, in my opinion, that's contributing to that. We have to teach our kids, we have to embrace failure as not being this bad thing that's evil, but that it's a necessary part of growth. And I think parents need to start communicating that message, and we'd have a lot less stressed out kids. I mean, at 16 years old, I don't know about you, but I was a pretty happy-go-lucky kid because I lived in a family where they weren't beating on me all the time. They didn't demand. I mean, they wanted me to do the best that I could, but they weren't demanding it to a point where I felt like if I didn't live up to their expectations, I had failed miserably, and therefore I must end my life. I mean, we've got to get this whole failure thing reeled in this society. Those are my beliefs, and that's basically why I compiled this and put it together in a, I think a fun read that's really, highlights, the positives of failure, and that they are positive. Without it, we can't grow into the people we are today. Undoubtedly, you failed throughout your life, although very successful. You failed. You failed your way to success.
Absolutely. No, I love what you're saying. I think you're right. I think it's not just parents that need to change. It is society in general.
Yes.
And I don't know if you've read Arianna Huffington's book Thrive, but she talks about a third metric for success, which is not just about about money and about possessions and about the jobs that we have and all of that kind of thing. It's about our well-being, and I think our society has lost sight of that to a large extent. And that there's a great pressure there's always been pressure on kids to perform, but I think there's a greater pressure now, and I think there's a lot more hiding of people's failures now. People are more private about them. And it's lovely in the couple of forums that we're both on, because people do share their failures on there. people will share, I've been having a really bad week, can somebody, help me out and support me? And I love that. I love the fact that, that we're sharing those things with each other and not being ashamed of them, as you say. They hold the potential for more growth than our successes do. And it's
so true. And when you get into the corporate world, and I'm a big fan of everything starts at home.
Yes.
But to your point, when you get into the corporate world, we're so used to, you must make up for your weaknesses. You've got to become stronger. And I'm a big advocate of no, you don't. Continue to focus on your strengths, but teach and learn how to coexist with the people who have, areas of where we're weak. Those are people we need to be partnering with. We need to be having our little joint operating agreements with these folks, because it doesn't serve me at 53 to work on my weaknesses. they're not going to get stronger.
No.
Because I'm already resistant to that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if I concentrate on keep getting stronger in the areas that, my strengths, my God-given talents, if you will, and let somebody else who's strong in areas where I'm weak, this is embracing that concept that failure is not a bad thing. Just because I'm not proficient at something doesn't mean that I'm not super effective in some other area.
That's right. Yeah. I was just reading something this morning about how important it is that we as human beings recognize that we're part of a tribe and that we need to be team players, and exactly what you're just saying. We all have our strengths and weaknesses, but together with a group of people, then we're very strong. And it's good to acknowledge our weaknesses, as you say, but not to then let them defeat us, but to let them, to find ways to overcome them, and or to bring people in who complement us.
Yes, very true.
So, do you have any advice for mothers? There's been several times in my career as a mother when I have really felt like a failure. I felt like I've made some bad decisions and I've let my children down. And there was something on Facebook a couple of days ago, and it said, behind every successful child is a mother who feels like she's a failure. And it's so incredibly true. Do you have advice for anybody who's feeling that way right now?
Well, I think that, first of all, it's acceptance. We talk about, I know that they're one of the big areas, the big hot buttons, if you will, as women go through a 9-month process of having a child, which is obviously, I've never, physically had that experience. I mean, I've, partnered in that experience, but not physically had that. And so with that decision, and again, it's a choice to have a child most of the time. So assuming that it's a choice to have a child, then we have to accept that with that choice are going to come changes in our bodies, changes in our attitude, changes in our physical health. And so I think what happens is, a lot of women, and I coach quite a few women, so I know this to be true, find themselves getting depressed about, their bodies changing and they're fat, or they're lacking energy. And then after the child is born, they go through that whole next phase of the wear down, as you will, of they're up all night, they're asleep. So they're, a woman, by the very nature of choosing to have a child, goes through probably closer to a 2-year period of intense struggle, intense, change. And so grace is the word that I use all the time, grace. And, again, we live in a society where it's almost like we're being conditioned by Madison Avenue that we have to look a certain way, we have to drive this car, and women are not immune to that. I mean, it's hard when we see Angelina Jolie or some other celebrity who works out 6 hours a day, has her own dietitian, et cetera, marching around with their kids, and they look super great. That's not the reality. And I think grace is the key word here. We have to show ourselves grace. We have to, and we being women, have to allow themselves to just, accept that there are going to be changes. It's part of that decision. Conversely, if somebody decides that they're never going to have children and I'm going to look a certain way, and when I'm 45, I'm still going to look great in a bikini and I'm going to go to the gym every day, they're also making a choice. And they're taking the natural steps toward, achieving that goal. So putting things in perspective, putting things in, in a more realistic frame, if you will, I think is a key for women. And that you're not a failure just because you're tired and angry, and you just got short with your child because you're tired and angry, and because you really would like to go out to dinner, but you're feeling really crappy about yourself. It's giving yourself grace, going with the flow, and just being tolerant of yourself. I think what I see a lot of times is women beat themselves up. I was talking to a client a couple of days ago. She's beating herself up, and she's in that place. She's got 2 small children. She's beating herself up, and I'm saying you got to slow it down here. Get it in perspective. You made the choice, number one, and you knew going into that choice that things were going to change, and just accept that, and be okay with delegating. Be okay with sharing responsibilities. You don't have to be the end all be all. You have a right. Just because you're the mother who gave birth doesn't mean that you don't have a right to have a home-based business, that your husband or partner doesn't have a responsibility in this as well. Even if they've gone to work for 8 to 10 hours, they still are a partner who also made a choice. And that may be a long answer,
yeah,
but that's the direction I tend to, coach with my clients. And the key word again is just show yourself grace.
yeah,
Be okay with who you are. We live in a society where we're all trying to be somebody else. We're all trying to, put on the Ritz. We're trying to put on a show, and we're actors in our own little drama. We need to just be real, be authentic, and just be graceful.
yeah. That's great advice. Kind of the flip side of that, I wonder what advice you'd have for a parent who's struggling with maybe a teenager who's going down a path that that we're not that happy with. How would you advise parents to kind of deal with that kind of situation? Because it's a difficult balancing act between, stepping back and saying, oh, it's okay, you do whatever you like, and, giving your child the right amount of guidance.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, it's a really delicate, because I think we live in a society today. There's a couple things that come to mind right out the gate, and it's communication, number one.
Yeah.
When we're communicating with our kids. When we're communicating in an open, authentic. Again, I use the word authentic a lot because it's really important. I believe if our children feel like they have a place that they can come and that they can share anything without judgment, and that's a big thing for kids. Kids are, they don't want to be judged. If they come to you and communicate, it's because they really feel compelled to do so. But we have to pay more attention. I mean, I look around my desk and I have a pad over here. I've got floating around here somewhere. I've got this really smart phone, smarter than I am, and so and the kids have all this too. I'm always amazed at these kids walking through the crosswalk texting, they're just on autopilot.
Yeah.
But so are the parents. And I think we have to kind of reel in our online activity. That's a big one. We have to check in. Unfortunately, a lot of kids right now are being raised virtually. They're getting their connection from the internet. They're in chat rooms. Their whole world is being shaped online, and that's not good. I've always said a family that plays together stays together, because they're out, they're going camping, they're doing things, they're riding bikes, but during that process, they're communicating, they're getting to know each other. And communication is so important. And again, I see this all the time. I have, numerous clients that are having challenges with teenagers. And the reason they're having challenges 9 times out of 10 is because they forgot that they are the parent and they're trying to be their kid's best friend. And it doesn't work. You aren't your child's best friend. You're the child's parent, and part of your choice when you took on that responsibility is your job is to guide them, shape their journey, provide them as they get older more and more rope and more leeway. But it's not to be their friend, and that's the problem that so many parents have, is that in the disconnect with their children. Is that I see this all the time. Mom and daughter are like BFFs. Well, you're not the BFF. You're the PFF, the parent, first and foremost, okay? It's not BFFs. And so we have to get away from that, and we have to realize, finally, it is absolutely okay to discipline our children. It's absolutely okay to take things away.
Yeah.
Somewhere along this journey, it became this crime for parents to parent. It really did. It became almost like it's bad. I mean, we can't spank a child anymore. We can't say anything harsh to them. I mean, we see it on the media as dramatic as it is. Out in your neck of the woods, wasn't there a young lady who was suing her parents? She wanted to be emancipated. They owed her money. They had to pay her to go for college, even though she didn't want to live there and she ran away. And I was just praying that the judge didn't rule in her favor, because this would open up this just floodgates of more parental child dysfunction. So, again, it comes down to, you're not your child's best friend. You're the parent, and we need to communicate with our kids. And I know certainly, in our family, our children are all grown now, but we had our own fair share of communication breakdowns. And I can look back and say, well, gosh, if I'd handled this differently. We don't get to do that. However, I know from wisdom through failure that had I done this differently then, I would have had a different outcome. And so communication and quit trying to be your kid's best friend would be my advice to anybody.
That's really awesome advice. Thank you, John. So I have one more question for you. What tips would you give to somebody who's kind of feeling in a place where life's not great at the minute? Are there any small steps that they could take now that you would advise, you know, if you had a coaching client who came to you and said, you know, I'm feeling like my life's a mess right now?
Mm-hmm. You know, it happens all the time, and that's the profession you and I are in. But even as coaches, I'm sure, I know you just recently went through a challenge with your son breaking a foot. You know, a seemingly small thing until they have reactions to medication, until they have these things, and you start feeling overwhelmed. I'm sure you felt it. So, you know, our job is to really help steer our clients down that road to finding their own solutions. But I think in answer to your question, the way I look at it is life is not easy. There's nothing easy about life today. And we're going to have challenges. It's our response to our challenges. It's how do we respond to those? Are we proactive or are we reactive? You know, people talk about, you know, well, I'm just so depressed. And I can cure depression in 15 seconds in anybody. They say, well, how do you do that? Well, you can't be depressed if you're thinking outside of yourself. See, the only way you can remain depressed is if you're totally 100% focused on yourself. Yeah. The minute you go focus, they say, well, how do you do that? I say, go help somebody carry their groceries in. Yeah. You can't be depressed while you're doing that because you're focused on something else. And I know Tony talks about this a lot. You can't stay depressed unless you're totally 100% self-absorbed. So the first thing I ask people is take a look at what is the situation. And some of this are things that, again, wisdom through failure, that our parents told us. You know, what's the worst thing that can possibly happen? You know, what's the worst thing that can happen? And go ahead and put it on the table. Since we tend to go there psychologically anyway, to the worst thing that can happen. We never go to the best thing that can happen, right? We go to what's the worst thing that can happen? Let's put it on the table.
Yeah.
Now, what can I do to prevent that from happening?
Yeah.
What are the steps I can take today to prevent that from happening? For example, I'm not going to be able to make the mortgage payment this month. Oh my God. Okay. What's the worst thing that can happen? You don't have enough money to pay the mortgage 2 weeks from now. Okay. So worst thing can happen. Worst thing can happen is you're going to get a nasty letter. So that's the worst thing that can happen right now. What can you do towards that? Well, I could have a yard sale. I could get rid of things where my garage is packed full of that I haven't used in a year, and sell them and take that money and pay my mortgage. I mean, I'm just giving a very fundamental example. And the other thing is that really we have to ask ourselves, is this really what's happening? Is this really why? Because we all have triggers. We all have things that, you know, something else is really bothering us. But over here, there's something it's kind of bothering us, but all of a sudden it becomes a convenient trigger. And so maybe, you know, dad's bringing something home from work that he's not sure if he's going to have a job next week. And son does something over here that's not even that egregious, and dad is all over him and just, See, these are the things we have to look at. We have to be present with our problems. We have to be present with our challenges. And we can't be out here because we all know that 99% of everything we worry about, even if it does happen, never happens in the way that we envisioned it to happen, right? Yeah. So be present with your challenges. Be present. But and the final thing is, okay, I know what my problems are today. I know the problems facing me before I head to California tomorrow for vacation. Now, I can stay within those problems, or I can put my energy into finding solutions. And when we focus on solutions, that's when the magic begins to happen. But too many people stay so immersed in the problem, and it just keeps getting bigger and bigger, and the ghosts start talking, and we visualize all this horrible, terrible stuff that will never happen. Do we want to put our energy feeding that, or do we want to put our energy into feeding the solution? And those are the things that I use in my life. I'm human too. I start to spin and I get that mental muck, but then I get myself grounded. I come back to presence and I say, okay, what got the problem, got that one down. Okay, we got it here. Okay, what are we doing solution-wise? What are we moving toward? See, we're either moving away from things or we're moving toward things. So we need to be always moving toward solutions when we get to that very disjointed place in our mind. Hopefully that answered. I know it's, again, a long question, but a long answer rather.
And I think I totally agree with what you're saying. I think, you know, what's often lacking is an acceptance of some level of personal responsibility. And I very much believe that we all have some control over whatever situation we're in. We always have some control over the outcome, no matter how bad the situation is. And that's what makes us powerful. When we own that, the outcome is down to us, instead of blaming other people, instead of being the victim and sitting back and saying, oh, well, this is just terrible, there's nothing I can do about it. And, I think it's so important that we're always taking personal responsibility and then looking for solutions. And that's exactly what we do as coaches. It's to help people find their own solutions that will work for them in their situation.
Absolutely. And there's no empowerment in being a victim. If you really think about it, the victim story is woe me. It's all about me. It's all about, and I'm not discounting it all. I mean, people are victimized every single day in our country. They're victimized sexually. They're victimized discriminatorily. They're victimized. However, the empowerment comes from taking, as you said, taking personal responsibility for my actions. If I make a decision, and I'm a big fan of choices, if I make the choice to do something, with that choice comes consequences. Some may be good, some may not be.
Yeah.
So it's worth taking just that little extra bit of time to really think things through. But we live in a spontaneous culture. I mean, we want things now.
Yeah.
I don't want to wait. Why would I wait for that? I want now. For everything else, there's MasterCard, right? So.
Yeah, no, that's so true. Well, that's incredible advice. Thank you so much for your time, John, and for your wisdom. And I urge you all to go and check out John's website. Could you just give us your website address, John?
Yeah, it's www.johnpageburton.com, JohnPageburton, johnpageburton.com.
Thank you so much. Thanks so much for being my guest today.
Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely. So I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Busy Mom Show. If you did, please like, subscribe, and share with your friends. And if you'd like to watch more shows, I have some great guests lined up and some great shows that I've already recorded. So head over to thebusymomshow.com and sign up for email updates. So I urge you all to go out there and begin taking control of your life and creating the fabulous, balanced life you just know you deserve. Goodbye for now.